This being the feast of Our Lady of Sorrows, I wanted to do a presentation because I was somewhat disappointed with some of the commentary I heard from various priests on Our Lady of Sorrows. To talk about Our Lady of Sorrows is to plunge not only into the depths of the Immaculate Heart, but it is also to plunge into the depths of our own understanding of the Catholic faith. Those who present Our Lady's Sorrows from an overly emotional and sentimental view, as though Our Lady's Sorrows are just those of an ordinary woman, although vastly magnified, I submit do not know either Our Lady nor the Catholic faith. So without any further ado, the first sorrow of Our Lady, which, as you should know, is the prophecy of Simeon that was uttered on the Feast of the Purification, more commonly known as Candlemas Day, that occurred 40 days after Christmas. And what was the essence of this first sorrow? Well, first of all, each and every one of us has a place in our heart that we would rather not go for whatever reason. We also have certain fears and phobias that we would rather not think about. Maybe we're afraid of heights. Maybe we're afraid of bumblebees. Maybe we're afraid of being arrested. Whatever our fears and phobias might be, they're deep-seated and they're a part of us. And of course, part of our faith is working to overcome them, especially the ones that are irrational and part of our lower nature. Then, there are those questions that we would rather not address. Each one of us has them. There are many today, for example, who don't really want to think about what the Novus Ordo is and the ramifications of that. No, because they want to live in a world where everything is sunshiny and hunky-dory. They don't want to live in a world that is teetering on the precipice, that is about to plunge into the abyss. No, they dare not look at the world that way, despite what Our Lady came to tell us at Fatima. Now let us take these two ideas and let us plunge into the Immaculate Heart. Our Lady, of course, is the seat of wisdom. She is also the spotless Virgin, the Immaculate One. All of the Fathers of the Church agreed that she was without sin. The reason I think they did not use the term Immaculate Conception was because the word conception has so many fleshy connotations, and the Fathers of the Church saw Our Lady as being angelic. They were afraid to sully her nature, and so they did not want to use fleshy terms in regard to her. And so they merely said that she is completely without sin. But that, of course, implies that she was immaculately conceived. But I digress. Let's move on. The first sorrow of Our Lady is the sorrow of a person who has just had a momentous revelation into those places in her heart that she would rather not think about. Our Lady, of course, was familiar with all the prophecies of Isaiah. and she knew that our Lord would go to his death. She did not know, however, who might be the instruments, the proximate instruments of his death. But that realization fell upon her the minute that Simeon said that he is a sign that will be contradicted. A sign to whom? Well, yes, a revelation to the Gentiles, but also a sign to his people Israel. And then Simeon would go on to say that out of many hearts, thoughts will be revealed. And that was the clincher for Our Lady. She understood instantly that our Lord Jesus Christ would be rejected by his own nation. Or as St. John put it in his illustrious preamble to his gospel, he came unto his own, and his own received him not. We'll elaborate on this in the second sorrow, but the first sorrow is a very hidden sorrow. It is the sorrow of a woman that has deep-seated wounds, and yet she goes about her life doing everything she can to hide them, and often being quite successful. Most people do not know the sorrows of this woman because most people don't care about the supernatural or the spiritual. They are immersed in the material things of this world and are therefore blind. But the first sorrow of Our Lady plunges deep. There are some who say that Our Lady had preternatural gifts, similar to Eve. Quite frankly, when we say such things, I think we do a disservice both to Our Lady and our Lord. St. Paul said of our Lord, he was like unto us in all things but sin. We know that our Lord hungered, he thirsted, he was cold, he had the ability to suffer, unlike Adam. Our Lord had the effects of our fallen nature, even if he did not share in the guilt of original sin. Our Lord, guided by the grace of God, always, of course, had his lower faculties in perfect control, similar to Adam, but this guided by the grace of God and not by preternatural gifts. The same, we can infer, occurred with Our Lady. Our Lady was virtuous to the extreme. She always did perfectly the will of God. Our Lady, of course, in her quote-unquote fallen state, had a guardian angel, I'm sure. If she had never fallen, she would not have needed a guardian angel. Because Adam and Eve in the garden were always perfectly attuned to the will of God and always performed the will of God perfectly. Even if they would have spent all day doing nothing but being idle. Because Adam and Eve were incapable of sin. The only sin that they could have committed was the sin of disobedience, and as long as they stayed away from the tree, they could have done anything they wanted and being perfectly compliant to the will of God. But not so Our Lady. Our Lady had to struggle just like we did. We cannot even imagine the temptations that Our Lady might have faced. But Our Lady would have probably, upon the revelation of St. Simeon, been instantly tempted to despair. But she did not. She did not despair. Rather, she looked around her. She saw perfectly the state of the Jews. She saw perfectly the state of the priests in the temple. She knew of their materialism. She knew of their corruption. She knew that largely they had rejected the perfect religion of Moses, and that they had built for them a religion according to their desires. And this troubled her. But maybe she thought that the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ would convert them. That the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ would be their salvation rather than their downfall. However, what pierced her heart was the realization that that which she loved most in this world, the Jewish nation, salvation history, the glorious history of her people, that would be used against our Lord. The religious leaders of the day would pit the teachings of God against our Lord in a constant war, in a constant enmity. Our Lady also, in her first sorrow, saw the real horrors of sin. She saw in detail, in great detail, the sins of her people and how horrible and repulsive they were in the sight of God. She was completely immersed in that ocean of dread and misery and foreboding that she had had only hints of and perhaps tried to ignore during the great joys of the Annunciation, the Visitation, and the Nativity. Even though there were sorrows in all three of these events, of which, if you know the sorrows of St. Joseph, you are aware. Our Lady, of course, knew that she could not tell St. Joseph of the glorious events of the Annunciation. She knew that St. Joseph might doubt. She knew that St. Joseph, great as what he was, would need some other confirmation. She knew all of these things, and great was her confusion, and great were her tribulations before this stupendous announcement of Simeon. But from that point onward, Our Lady would realize that she was going to share in the sufferings of her Son, and that these sufferings were going to divide her, as it were. They would divide her. And now on to the second sorrow.